In the words of a former Turkish prime minister, Turkey is a European country, an Asian country, a Middle Eastern country, a Balkans country, a Caucasian country, a neighbor to Africa, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea, all of these. If there's one word I would use to describe Turkey, it would be the crossroads of the world, centered between Europe and the Middle East, the Asian steppe, and deserts, as well as snow-capped mountains. This truly is the centerpiece between modern Europe and the tradition of the Middle East. A country that traces its origins to the horse lords on the equestrian steppes of Eurasia that would eventually settle down in one of the most modern, sophisticated cities. This country is secular and religious, modern and traditional, forward-thinking and reactionary, all at the same time. Its contradictions are staggering. I would argue that Turkey has produced the most fascinating, complex, and contradictory national conscience on the planet. In fact, it is the center point of all landmasses on the planet Earth. I can only scratch the surface of this incredibly complex and contradictory country. But hopefully, I can give you a rundown for you, the viewers, on how this country operates on the world stage. As most people know, Turkey is found on both the European and Asian continents. However, I would probably argue that Europe is part of Asia, as in Eurasia. But nonetheless, it's sandwiched at the crossroads of the world, and its history and culture reflect this. The only other two countries that straddle two continents, as ambiguous as the category of continents are, would be Russia and Panama. The vast majority of the area was located in a region once called Asia Minor. However, there is a portion that is in the European Balkans. Today, the portion that is part of what we call Asia is called Anatolia, an area of an incredibly rich history dating back to the Stone Age. Thanks to the Gulf Stream, among other factors, this area has a fairly warm Mediterranean climate with mild winters, and can be used for growing crops all year round. This is in contrast to the Eurasian steppes of which the Turkic people trace their heritage to, which has very cold winters as well as very hot summers and is not suitable for large populations. Anatolia is also very mountainous, which has provided a protective barrier for Turkey and other civilizations in that region. However, to the south lies flat deserts, which have provided less territory for protection and more for conquest. The glaciers of those mountains make Turkey an upstream nation, which gives them some degree of power over, say, Iraq and Syria. Geography has also played a role in the country's ideological divide. The northern parts, closer to Europe, are rather secular, urban, well-educated, and rich, whereas the southern portions of the country are by and large more conservative, religious, and traditional. More similar to, say, Syria than they are to, say, Romania. Turkey's history of civilizations is incredibly old and complex, dating back to the Indo-European Hittites, the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, etc. But for the sake of not making this video centuries long, I'm just gonna start off with the precursor of the Turkish state, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, who had converted to Islam, had become a settlement people rather than a nomadic people, and had eventually conquered the Greek city of Constantinople under the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, turning it into what we now know as Istanbul. The Ottomans were not the first Turkic power or empire, but they were the last, and they were the ones that had the most profound impact of conquering Constantinople and ushering in the rise of the modern age. For a period of time, the Ottoman Turks were the most powerful nation on the planet Earth. However, they were defeated at the Siege of Vienna and were not a major participant in the exploration of the Americas due to being cut off from the Atlantic. Meanwhile, Portugal, Spain, England, France, the Netherlands, etc. had been setting up colonies in the Americas, while the Ottomans were left out in part due to geography, becoming far weaker, oftentimes considered to be the sick man of Europe. The sick man of Europe made an even bigger mistake, joining the German side during World War I. While there were initial successes against Australian and New Zealander troops during the Battle of Gallipoli, World War I proved to be a monumental disaster leading to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Had it not been for the leader Ataturk, who had led the country in the aftermath of World War I, then perhaps Turkey would have been divided by various European powers as well, but thankfully the Turks managed to maintain some degree of personal autonomy. The ugliest chapter of Turkish history during this time period was the Armenian genocide orchestrated by the Young Turks, among others, which was in part due to a perception that Armenians, being Christian, were helping the Allied powers. To this day, the Turkish government denies this despite overwhelming evidence. Also during World War I, the Arabs were backed by the British, who thought that if the Arabs helped fight against the Ottoman Turks, that they would then get their independence. This is where the epic tales of Lawrence of Arabia come from, a British officer who helped lead Bedouin troops against Turkish German-backed forces during World War I. However, the British returned the favor for the Arab heroism by taking up Arab land and turning them into colonies along with that of France and Italy, much to T.E. Lawrence's disgruntlement. Despite these problems, Ataturk, the founder of the Turkish state, had set up a modern society. He switched from the Arabic script to the Latin script, separated mosque from state, and brought in European experts to set up every facet of the country's institutions in order to modernize into the current day. To this day, Ataturk is considered to be, well, the father of the Turks, and he is a national icon and his greatest hero. If anything, he could be closely compared to, say, George Washington in the United States. While being a quasi-strongman with a military background, Ataturk did set up a system that was meant to quell the rise of authoritarianism. However, this led to ups and downs, oftentimes with military coups and all sorts of instability and crackdowns on freedom of speech by people after him. And it's still quite, to this day, very complicated. Turkey joined World War II on the Allies at the very end, playing a very minor role, but during the Cold War it joined the NATO alliance alongside Greece, its quasi-rival, in part due to a shared disdain of the Soviet Union. It also participated in American-led military interventions, most notably in the Korean War. Turkey still does maintain a very complicated relationship with Greece, particularly over Cyprus. Turkey had invaded Cyprus during the 70s and set up its own Turkish Cyprus, and much to the disgruntlement of the international community and Greece. This today strains relationships between the two nations. Turkey has also come at loggerheads with many of its Western allies, most notably the United States, when it opposed the Iraq War. Another source of tension are the Kurds, an ethnic group that are similar to Iranians in southern Turkey that were not given their own state by European powers after the collapse of the Ottoman Turks. To this day, clashes are very frequent. And to this day again, let's move on to its economy. Turkey is one of the top 20 largest economies on the planet. It is an economic powerhouse, however, it's also one that has dealt with a great deal of income inequality, corruption, and inflation, as well as all-around economic mismanagement. Unlike many major Middle Eastern countries, Turkey is not a major exporter of hydrocarbon resources. However, it does have some gas resources and is at the crossroads of various gas pipelines, which does give it some leverage. The most massive recent economic issue is inflation, or more specifically hyperinflation, as many Turks prefer to use the US dollar, the euro, or even Bitcoin over the Turkish lira, due to a lot of the low interest rates that have produced a lot of construction but also have led to a great deal of inflation. Turkey's primary export, if you could call it that, would probably be tourism, as millions of tourists throughout the year flock to various Turkish sites to witness their incredibly rich history and culture. Moving on to politics. Turkey has an incredibly complex relationship with the rest of the world. On one hand, it's a country that is, as stated before, very cosmopolitan and modern and interconnected with the rest of the world, quite secular and educated. On the other hand, it's also quite reactionary, traditional, religious, and conservative. Turkey's capital is located in the city of Ankara, in the Anatolian Peninsula, right in the center of it, as a way of consolidating power geographically. The country also has a parliamentary system of government. The most important figure in the past decade or so has been Erdogan, or Erdogan. I'm really bad at pronouncing his name. At first, he started out as a modernist, but in more recent years, he's pushed more towards traditionalism and conservatism. His grip on power has proven to be quite strong, even surviving a military coup. Turkish society is even more complex. As stated before, the country is very well educated and modern and urbanized in certain parts. At the same time, it also has a very reactionary element and has had a difficult time adjusting to the modern world, albeit far easier than that of, say, the Arab countries. If you speak to people in Istanbul, you probably won't see any significant difference between the mindset of a typical Westerner and the mindset of a typical Turk in that region. However, on the other hand, if you go to southern Anatolia and you witness people and their mindsets close to the Syrian border, and it would be quite a different story. For example, Ataturk, the founder of the nation, was vehemently supportive of women's rights. However, Erdogan and his wife, for that matter, are quite in favor of very strict traditional gender norms. Turkey, like France, has also seen some of the excesses of certain facets of secularism. For example, when the Turkish government tried to ban women from consensually wearing head covers. Turkey is also home to the Muslim world's largest pride parade, and while it is fairly large, it has also been the subject of bans and police crackdowns. There is also widespread suppression of freedom of the press, and Turkey holds one of the highest numbers of journalists in prison. In the eyes of many Westerners, Turkey is open but not open enough. However, some Turks actually prefer this hybrid model, not being as open as that of Western Europe, but also not being as closed as, say, Saudi Arabia. You can come to your own conclusion as you will. As far as ethnic tensions go, the largest by far would be that of the Kurds, an ethnic group that lives in southern Turkey along with northern Syria and Iraq and parts of Iran. Turkey, despite being the most open societies out of these four countries, has oftentimes been one of the worst at suppressing them, with the exception of perhaps Iraq. To this day, this is a source of continued political tension. Nonetheless, many Turks have let Kurds enter forms of formal government partnerships. Many of the country's highest-ranking positions are now run by Kurds. However, nonetheless, the Kurdistan separatists face quite a great deal of violence. However, they've also committed violence themselves, and it's a very complicated situation, albeit probably significantly better off than anything that goes on in Syria and Iraq. Speaking of the Kurds, let's move on to the military. Turkey actually has the second biggest army in NATO, and their military is a formidable force. However, they're surrounded by regional powers like Russia, Israel, Iran, and various European states. Turkey was anti-communist during the Cold War and fought alongside Americans in the Korean War, and even held American nuclear weapons sites at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. However, tensions have also risen. When the threat of communism subsided, Turkey preferred to take a somewhat independent path. This didn't start immediately, as at the beginning, Turkey really wanted to join the European Union and become brought into the Western fold. This ended up failing, particularly due to the concern by France and Germany, which saw a great deal of cultural differences between Muslim Turkey and predominantly secular Europe, along with the fact that Turkey is, while quasi-democratic, not quite democratic enough. The Germans in particular were worried about immigration, as Germany already has a very large Turkish population and was worried about a giant mass flood, if you could call it that, of more migrants. Turkey in recent years has had less interest in the European Union and preferred to go on its own path due to many of these controversies, and in the process has become rather more autocratic. Turkey sees itself as the protector of Muslim populations in Eastern Europe, namely the Balkans, such as the Bosniaks and the Albanians. On top of that, Turkey has oftentimes tried to leverage the threat of impeding Arab migrants into Europe through their own borders. Turkey's relationship with the US, on the other hand, is that of a frenemyship. On one hand, the two countries are both members of NATO and have worked together tremendously. On the other hand, there have been core issues, namely over the Kurds. The US and the Kurds have been key allies in fighting ISIS, and even more so beforehand. However, Turkey, while an enemy of their shared enemy, say, the ISIS forces and other Islamists, has oftentimes preferred them to the Kurds. It's unlikely that Turkey will ever be an ally to the US in the same way that, say, the UK and Canada are. At the same time, it's also unlikely that it will be a core enemy of the US like, say, Iran or North Korea is. Turkey, by and large, prefers to just go its own way. Turkey also maintains a complex relationship with the US enemy Iran, as both oppose certain Kurdish forces, at the same time both have varying different cultural values. As far as its neighbor Syria goes, well, the relationship is complex. Both of them fight the Kurds. At the same time, Turkey has had quite a lot of issues with Syria's backing up by Russia and Iran. Some would lead this to the conclusion that Turkey would be in the Saudi-led camp. However, this is not the case, as the Turks really don't follow anybody. Turkey has backed up Qatar in its disputes with Saudi Arabia, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, despite its disputes with the Egyptian government, which is backed up by Saudi Arabia. Its relationship with Israel is also complex. It did not participate directly in the Arab-Israeli wars, founding relations with Israel formally. However, it has had problems with Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, as well as the flotilla controversy. As you can tell, Middle Eastern geopolitics make Game of Thrones look fairly simple. The relationship with Russia is just as complex. The two countries share a history of quite a lot of competition and conflict. And while Turkey doesn't hate Russia anywhere near as much as the Western powers do, it does have quite a prickly relationship, oftentimes engaging in proxy wars with Turkey backing Azerbaijan and Russia backing Armenia. Meanwhile, the conflict in Cyprus has not been completely resolved. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention China. Turkey is one of the very few Muslim-majority countries that actually criticizes the Chinese government's treatment of ethnic Uyghurs, who are not only Muslim but also a Turkic-speaking people group. This has led to Turkey gaining a great deal of traction in the rest of the Muslim world, which is too afraid to stand up to China. In recent years, the rise of neo-Ottomanism has emerged, this idea that Turkey should not just govern ethnic Turks, but also much of the Balkans, the Middle East Levant region, and parts of Mesopotamia, as once historically was. This might sound totally far-fetched and impossible in the modern day, but keep in mind throughout much of history, the Anatolian Peninsula, or its rulers, did control many of these regions. And with the relative decline of American power as an ability to make sure that other countries don't steal territory from others, this could lead to a situation in which Turkey takes over failed states like Iraq and Syria. So will Turkey become a great power? Well, I don't know. It was once a great power, and maybe it will become again. But it's very difficult to predict the future. What I do know is that we should be paying a lot more attention to this country. Thanks for watching. Bye.